My brother stood at the head of the table, holding a glass of champagne, and announced to everyone in the room that I had done nothing to deserve a single dollar of our mother's estate. The room didn't laugh. But no one argued either. And somehow that silence was worse. I want to tell you how that moment ended. But first, you need to understand where I started. My mother raised the two of us alone after my father left when I was 4. She worked double shifts at a hospital laundry for most of my childhood. Coming home with her hands cracked and her back bent, but always making sure there was food on the table and a light left on in the hallway. My brother, who is 6 years older than me, remembers things differently. He remembers a version of our childhood that has him as the one holding everything together. Maybe that's true for a 6-year-old, but I was the one who stayed. When I was 17, my mother was diagnosed with early-stage lupus. Nothing immediately life-threatening, but the kind of chronic illness that slowly rewrites everything about how you live. She had flares that left her bedridden for days. She had medication changes that made her dizzy and confused. She had doctor's appointments that came in clusters. Rheumatology, nephrology, cardiology. And someone had to sit in those waiting rooms with her. Someone had to write down what the doctor said because she couldn't always hold it all together afterward. My brother had already moved to Denver by then. He had a job he liked and a girlfriend who became a wife and an apartment that always seemed to be getting renovated in his telling of it. He called on Sundays. He sent money sometimes in the early years, but he wasn't there. I was there. I deferred my college acceptance for a year to stay home. Then another year. Then I enrolled part-time at the community college 40 minutes away and drove back to check on my mother between classes. I eventually transferred to a 4-year school, but I picked one close enough that I could be home in an hour and a half if she needed me. I graduated late. I built a career late. I did everything on a delayed schedule because my schedule was structured around someone else's need, and I never once resented her for it. I want to be clear about that. I never resented my mother. She didn't ask me to stay. I chose it every single time. What I didn't expect was that my brother would eventually use that choice against me. When my mother's health declined more seriously in her late 60s, kidney involvement, significant fatigue, the lupus finally progressing the way the doctors had always warned it might, I moved back home completely. I had been renting a place 30 minutes away, but I gave it up. I set up a spare room. I learned how to manage her medication schedule, how to talk to insurance companies, how to navigate the appeals process when they denied her treatments. I learned what questions to ask her nephrologist and how to document her symptoms for her rheumatologist and how to get her the home infusion therapy she needed without the hospital billing system swallowing her whole. My brother flew in twice. Once when she had a bad hospitalization 2 years before she died, and once for Christmas the year before. Both times he stayed at a hotel nearby. Both times I watched him sit with her for a few hours and then excuse himself to take phone calls in the driveway. Both times he left before the hard part. She passed on a Tuesday in March. She was 71. It was quiet and she was home and I was holding her hand. The attorney read the will 3 weeks later. My mother had drafted it 8 years prior when her health first turned serious, and she had never updated it. The language was general. She left the house and her savings to be split equally between her 2 children. That was it. That was the document. I thought that was straightforward. I didn't think there was anything to argue about. I was wrong. My brother flew back for the estate meeting and brought his wife, who sat beside him with a yellow legal pad and a pen she kept clicking. The attorney went through the documents. The house was appraised. The savings account balance was confirmed. And then my brother cleared his throat and said he thought we needed to talk about the division before anything was finalized. He said he had concerns. He said I had been living in the house rent-free for years and that this constituted a benefit I had already received, one that should be factored into any equitable distribution. He used the word equitable several times. His wife wrote things on her legal pad. The attorney looked at me. I didn't say anything yet. I was still processing the fact that my brother was speaking this way. In this clipped transactional language about the years I had spent in that house, what those years had actually cost me, what they had actually meant. He wasn't finished. He said that he had made financial contributions over the years, the money he had sent periodically, and that those contributions deserved to be accounted for as well. When I asked him to specify the amount, he said he didn't have exact figures, but that it was substantial. His wife stopped writing, then he said it. Flat and certain, like a verdict he had already delivered to himself a long time ago. He said I hadn't sacrificed anything. He said I had been living here anyway, that this was just my life, that he was the one who had to miss out on holidays, on time with her, on being close, because someone had to go build something and support the family financially. He said that his absence was its own kind of sacrifice, one that no one had ever acknowledged. He said I didn't deserve an equal share. The attorney quietly suggested we take a short break. I walked to the kitchen and stood at the sink and looked out the window at the backyard where my mother used to grow tomatoes until her hands got too bad. I thought about the drives to the infusion center. I thought about the night I sat on the bathroom floor with her because she was too dizzy to stand and too proud to say she was scared. I thought about the promotion I hadn't taken because it would have required relocating to Atlanta. I thought about the person I had been dating who eventually stopped waiting for me to have time. I thought about all of it, and then I walked back into the room. I didn't raise my voice. I want you to know that. I sat down, folded my hands, and spoke very quietly. I told my brother that I had something I needed to share before we continued. I told him that over the years, I had kept records. Not because I expected any of it to matter. Not because I had planned for this moment, but because I am the kind of person who keeps records. Appointment logs. Caregiver documentation. Mileage logs for the medical trips, which are tax deductible and which I had tracked carefully for years. I told him I also had a file. A simple folder I had put together after my mother's second hospitalization, on the advice of a social worker who told me that family caregivers often end up in exactly this situation and that I should protect myself. The folder had a care log. Dates, tasks, hours. Conservatively documented. More than 4 years of primary caregiving, averaging roughly 30 hours a week. I had looked up the average hourly rate for home health aides in our state. I was not suggesting my mother owed me anything, but if my brother wanted to talk about equitable, if he wanted to sit in this room and use that word, then I was prepared to put a number on what equitable actually looked like. His wife had stopped clicking her pen. I also told him that I had consulted an attorney of my own 2 weeks before this meeting, just to understand my options. And that attorney had told me something interesting, that in many states, a surviving adult child who served as a primary caregiver has grounds to pursue a claim against the estate for the reasonable value of those services, particularly when no compensation was ever received and the services were documented. It is not a guaranteed outcome. It is not without complication. But it is a real legal avenue, and I had the paperwork to pursue it if I chose to. I set the folder on the table. I told my brother I didn't want to go that route. I told him that I had loved our mother, and that I was not interested in turning her estate into a legal dispute. I told him that I had not kept those records to use as a weapon, but I had kept them, and I was not going to sit across a table from him and let him tell me that I had sacrificed nothing. There was a long silence. He looked at the folder. He looked at his wife. She looked at her legal pad, which now had very little written on it that was going to be useful to him. He said he hadn't meant it the way it came out. I said I understood, and I didn't argue with him. The estate was split equally, the way our mother had written it. We signed the documents that afternoon. My brother flew back to Denver 2 days later. His wife did not say goodbye to me. I stayed in the house for another month, going through my mother's things slowly, room by room. I found her old recipe cards in the kitchen drawer, handwritten in her slanted cursive. I found the photograph of her at 23 that I had never seen before, laughing at something outside the frame. I kept those things. I kept everything that mattered. The house sold in the spring. It was a fair price for the market, and the closing went smoothly. I used my portion of the sale as a down payment on a place of my own. A small house, nothing remarkable, but mine. The first place I had ever owned. The first place that was only mine. My brother texted me the day the sale closed. He said he hoped I was doing okay. I replied and said I was. And I was. I genuinely was. Not because I had won something or proven something or put him in his place. I was okay because I had spent years knowing exactly who I was in that family, knowing what I had given and why I had given it, and his inability to see that had never actually changed what it was. His words at that table could not reach back and hollow out the years. They were already full. I think about my mother most mornings. I think about her hands. I think about the way she used to call me before bed, even after I moved back home, just to say goodnight. The habit of a woman who had spent years calling a daughter who lived far enough away that a call was necessary, and then kept calling even when I was just down the hall because the habit was the love, and she didn't want to give it up. I didn't do what I did to earn anything. I did it because she was my mother and she needed me and I could be there, so I was. That's the whole of it. But if someone ever tries to tell you that being there counted for nothing, that presence is worth less than distance, that care is not a contribution, you are allowed to open your folder. You are allowed to be very quiet and very certain and put the truth on the table in front of them. And then you are allowed to let it speak for itself and walk out into whatever comes next and not look back. I keep coming back to that moment at the sink, standing in my mother's kitchen, looking out at the yard where her tomato plants used to be, while my brother sat in the next room with his legal pad and his certainty. I wasn't angry, exactly. I was something quieter than angry. I was clear. That clarity didn't come from nowhere. It was built the same way everything real gets built. Slowly, without applause. One unremarkable day at a time. Every appointment I drove her to, every insurance call I sat through. Every night I wrote down her symptoms in a notebook, because I had learned that if you don't write things down, the doctors forget and the insurers deny and the whole system moves on without you. That was the work. Not dramatic, not visible. Just steady because it had to be. I think about what it actually takes to do right by someone when doing right costs you something. Not money, necessarily, though it cost me that too. It costs you time you can't recover. It costs you versions of yourself you'll never get to find out about. The promotion you didn't take. The city you didn't move to. The relationship that ran out of patience before you did. Integrity isn't a feeling. It's a series of choices you make when no one is keeping score, and you make them anyway because the alternative is someone you don't want to be. My brother made different choices. I've had to sit with that without making it into a story where he's a villain, because the truth is more complicated than that. He told himself a version of events that protected him. Most people do. The mind is very good at finding the angle where you're the one who gave the most and got the least. I'm not immune to that either, but I had the records. Not to weaponize, I meant that when I said it. But because keeping records was itself an act of clear-eyed thinking, it was my way of saying, this is real, this happened, I will not let it become invisible just because no one was watching. That's the thing I want to hold on to, not the outcome. The equal split, the house sale, the down payment on my own place. Those things matter, but they're not the point. The point is that I walked into that room knowing exactly what I had done and why I had done it, and no one's revision of events could reach back and change the substance of those years. You can argue about money. You can argue about fairness. You cannot argue someone out of what they actually lived. I'm in my own house now. It's small and imperfect and entirely mine. Some mornings I sit at the kitchen table with coffee before the day starts, and I think about what my mother's hands looked like near the end. How she still tried to do things herself, always until she couldn't. She was stubborn in the way that people are stubborn when they've had to be strong for so long they forgot how to ask. I got some of that from her. I used to think it was a flaw. I don't anymore. What I carried out of those years isn't resentment. It's something harder to name, a kind of knowledge about what you're capable of when the situation asks it of you, and a quiet insistence on not letting anyone else define the value of what you gave. My brother needed me to be small so the numbers could work in his favor. I declined. Not loudly, just firmly with documentation, and then I went home. That's enough. That has always been enough.